So there was a huge 49ers development this past week. And as they enter this next game against the NFL's number one defense, I think I have to hammer that home. The Houston Texans have the best defense in the league. The development is largely being ignored. And I've talked about it a lot, but it's taken another step. Talking about it with George Kittle today. The 49ers, if they can run the football the way that they did this past week, and it wasn't just the efficiency of the running, it was the style with which they ran. It is the biggest philosophical shift that we've seen in the Kyle Shanahan era when it comes to running the ball. If they can do what they did on the field against the Atlanta Falcons moving forward at even 70% of the clip that we saw against the Falcons, if they can do that moving forward against the Texans, and that's the number one defense, so it's a great test study. They can do that moving forward. The 49ers are going to be one of the NFC favorites this year, regardless of whether or not they've got Nick Bosa or Fred Warner on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, it is that big of a deal if this team can run, and if they can run with power, especially against the defense like the Houston Texans are going to be showing up this week. Aggressive, downhill, potentially susceptible to play action if the 49ers can run the ball. Anyway, we need to let some of the experts talk about this, starting with George Kittle.
Sunday was the most power you guys have run in
a
years.
Minute. It's been a minute.
Maybe since 2019 Pittsburgh.
That's a great memory, yeah.
But from your perspective, is that a little more fun? I know you've talked about moving a guy from point A to point B.
Power is fantastic. It's God's play. You know, it's like it's buckle up, be more physical than the guy across from you. I love gap scheme. It's really fun to do, and Atlanta was kind of primed for it. You know, they were really fast, athletic defensive line, but they don't have a Vita Vea out there. And so when you can move those guys a little bit easier, it makes gap scheme significantly easier. Got the linebackers running, know how Kyle does all the motions and stuff like that too. Gets backers' eyes off just a little bit, slows them down, allows us to punch a hip, roll out a backer, and then Christian just one-on-one with safeties all day.
2019, you ended up going crazy with the zone runs down the stretch. Did the gap stuff early in the season, you feel, help set that up just because you attack defenses in multiple different ways?
In 2019?
Yeah.
Yes, but I also think that our running backs figured out how to run it better kind of towards the end of the year, our outside zone. And then when you had a guy like Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert, who both are like 4-2, 4-3 running backs, the way they can stretch and cut, there just weren't, I don't think teams were really ready for our Zorro stuff and the Spirit Bros stuff yet. So that was very helpful in that. And we still did a little bit of gap scheme there late in the year, but yeah, I just don't think teams were ready for all those double teams by me and Juice.
So as I'm talking to guys in the locker room, 2019 starts to become a parallel. And that's a good season to parallel to, right? That was a season of youthful exuberance for the 49ers. It was a breakout season following 2017 and 2018, which are just injury-plagued nightmares for the 49ers. And Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were still building the entire roster in 2017 and 2018. But by 2019, they had turned a corner in a big way defensively. They started the season a little bit slower offensively, but they completely hit their stride by the end of it. I mean, they were just rolling teams. NFC Championship game against the Green Bay Packers is a great example. They're averaging 7 yards a carry. They didn't even have to pass to annihilate Green Bay in an NFC title game. And remember how hard the NFC title game against Detroit was just a couple of years ago? Well, just remember back to that January 2020 NFC Championship game against the Packers, and the 49ers just shredded them. But it was a season-long build to get to that point. And the way that they got to that point with the run game was through diversity of rushing attack on the ground early. Then, as you heard George Kittle say, I love that interview because he gets into the weeds with what happened there. He talked about the speed of the 49ers running backs and then the adaptation. They learned how to run the outside zone, how to plant their foot in the ground, cut up field. They learned how to run that within the context, within the parameters of defenses who didn't know what was coming by the end of the season. The 49ers ran a ton of gap scheme stuff early in the year. And I'll explain the difference between gap and zone. I know that we have some viewers that probably would like to know the technical delineation between the two. But just know that the 49ers diversity of running technique in 2019 helped pave the way all the way to the Super Bowl. And what we're seeing here in 2025 is a diversity of running technique that has allowed them to jumpstart the run game. And I think down the stretch, there's a chance that this can follow the same trajectory as 2019 on the offensive side of the ball. Plus that they've got a hell of a pass game this year. They've got two quarterbacks who can get it done in Brock Purdy and Mac Jones. And I think most of the media, most of social media is just focusing on Brock and Mac, and especially Mac because he's the one that's been playing the football recently. And they're just zeroed in on the QB position because that's the lazy, easy way to analyze this. But the bedrock of what the 49ers do is the run game. And that's the biggest story that is just staring us in the face based on what happened against Atlanta. I mean, they did something unprecedented against Atlanta with 9 power runs at 7.1 yards per carry on power. Now, okay, let me back up. Let me explain. There is gap scheme and there is zone scheme blocking. The 49ers under Kyle Shanahan, and this dates back to Mike Shanahan with the Denver Broncos, which, even dates back to Bob McKittrick with the 49ers, the offensive line coach. And there's Alex Gibbs, who was the O-line coach of those Denver Broncos teams back in the day. The outside zone is the Shanahan thing. Zone blocking involves blocking an entire zone. You stretch out like an accordion as the offensive line toward the perimeter. Each offensive lineman is in charge of picking up a certain zone. So whoever comes into that zone, sometimes you have to block 2 guys. You get a hand on one guy, and then you got to go to the next guy. You have to take out a large swath of grass and make sure that you disrupt the defenders enough so that a running back can read as he stretches to the outside so he can plant his foot in the ground and cut up field at the right moment. That is what the outside zone is, and inside zone is different because the run is going to go up the middle, but it is still a zone blocking scheme. That has been virtually synonymous with what the 49ers have run under Kyle Shanahan over the years. Now, they have gap scheme plays also installed. They just haven't run them as often over the years. But gap scheme is different. It's you pick a gap. A gap is right up the middle. B gap, C gap. As the letters get bigger, as they go further down the alphabet, the gap that we're talking about is further away from the center position. Every single lineman or fullback or blocking tight end, George Kittle, somebody who blocks a heck of a lot as a tight end, is responsible for a different gap, and they charge hard. It's not about finesse and getting to the outside. It's about taking the gap in front of you and playing some big boy football. And as I said after the Falcons game, the 49ers big boyed the Falcons because they ran more gap scheme than they did zone scheme. And they've done that now 2 weeks in a row. And they didn't run any power, which is part of gap scheme. So let's just make sure that you understand it's under that umbrella. They didn't run any power in weeks 1 to 3. And they've started running it now. And they didn't run well in weeks 1 to 3. And now they're running well. If this continues right here, like we are seeing in front of our eyes, an offense that led the league in passing over the first 6 or 7 weeks, like attempts and quarterback injuries and everything negative that comes with throwing the ball too much. They weren't really getting a good grip on game flow. They were winning in rather miraculous ways. Like the game against the Rams, Mac Jones threw 49 times. They were able to control the ball just enough and force the takeaways at just the right time to win, but it wasn't a sustainable formula to the point that the advanced statistics told us that the 49ers should have had only about a 2% chance to win that game. But they did win. The thing, moving forward, you got to say, how can they build this into sustainability? How can they be a true Super Bowl contender with the pieces that they have in this building? And I think the only answer, especially after you've lost Nick Bosa and Fred Warner on the defensive side, and you've got a bunch of young players there, the only answer is to find an elite offense, and that elite offense must be balanced. It is not sustainable to have a pass-heavy, especially if your defense isn't good. Because you could score a lot of points with a pass-dominant offense, but you can't control the clock. You can't control the ball. You can't hog it in a way that keeps your defense off the field. You have to run. Like, being balanced, running the football is mandatory when you consider the 49ers' narrow path to glory here in 2025. And every team, especially given the parity of the league right now, every team that is in the playoff hunt, especially teams in first place like the 49ers at 5-2, need to push all chips in to the strategy that's going to help them win as many games this year as possible. And for the 49ers, it has to be balance and running. And that's the development that we saw against the Falcons. The strategy dates back to the game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And now we all get to see it put on display against the Houston Texans. Number one defense in the entire NFL. Good defensive line, but here's the thing. It's going to be mandatory for the 49ers to run the ball this week. Houston's number 18 against the run. They're number 1 against the pass. And it's because they can get after the passer. If you can't run in this game, they play downhill. They've got Azeez Al-Shire. He'll take your head off. I mean, Azeez Al-Shire is a hard hitter, right? I think the corners for this team, Derek Stingley, Kamari Lassiter, both are extremely downhill, violent, physical corners who can play the run really well too, but you don't want them treating your underneath passing options like sitting ducks. That's a really good way for this game to end prematurely for San Francisco, or at least their chances to end prematurely. And you really can't sit back with Danielle Hunter on one side of this pass rush and multiple good edge rushers coming after you and some good defensive tackles too for the Houston Texans. You know, Will Anderson is 250 pounds maybe, but he has the strength to win with power. And that's really scary when you've got a player who should be a speed-based player based on his weight, and he could win with power coming off one of the edges. When you've got a traditional edge rusher like Danielle Hunter, who's won so many matchups over the course of his career, if you let these guys come at you in the pass game, that's the reason why they're the number one defense in all of football. The Seahawks have a tremendous offense this year. Seattle's been playing really well offensively. They in fact, they've seen a ton of success in every game except for when they played the 49ers, who still had Nick Bosa and Fred Warner, and when they played the Houston Texans this past week. Other than that, Seattle's been rolling along offensively. They turned the ball over 4 times against Houston. They won that game because of their defense and because of the fact that Houston's offense was inept against the Seattle defense. But the Seattle offense, it was tough sledding. I mean, Will Anderson had a strip sack touchdown in the end zone of Sam Darnold, which just goes to show you the dangers of dropping back too many times against this team. So I cannot wait to see what the 49ers offense and what this run game is able to come out with against this Houston team. I want to see if there is a matchup diagram from SF Data Niners, because he does such a good job with some of these previews for these games. I'm not sure if he has anything up there. Well, this is all the way, for some reason, I am not logged into Twitter. We got to change that. Yeah, Twitter logged me out. That's really annoying. I'll have to figure that. Mike, can you send me? Do you have like a little data matchup breakdown between what SF Data Niners does with the EPA? I want to take a look at that. And I think we also need to hear a little bit more from George Kittle. He had his press conference today. So why don't we take a look at everything that George had to say? I know I shared the little snippet a little bit earlier, but we can watch the whole thing from George as well right now.
7th round draft pick from Iowa is doing a pretty good job. He's filled in since week 2, and I think he's done a solid job. I like him too because he asks questions and he listens and he takes coaching really well. Stereotypical Iowa guy, it's pretty boring. I think Mike Hill's done a fantastic job. I think the overall thing with the rookie class is they're attentive and they ask questions and they listen when you give them something to, I told Mike Hill Williams something during training camp. I said, hey, you should do this. He was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. I'll do that then. And just like the way that rookies, sometimes rookies that are, some guys have egos. And I think our rookie class here is very eager to learn, and none of them really have an ego. Like, they have their swagger to them, but they're all appreciative of the opportunity to be a 49er.
It seems like it'd be easy for those guys to press a little bit because they are thrust into these roles and guys ahead of them getting hurt or whatever. How have they avoided that? Have you had to say anything, or have you seen messaging to that effect at all?
Not really. I think really, our defensive rookies have all had to play a lot. I think Connor's the only one on offense that's really played.
Yeah.
But I did see Connor was the first rookie to have a catch this season. That's awesome. Go Hawks. But I think on the defense, I credit that a lot to Coach Shanahan and Robert Saleh. I think they just, I don't know what Saleh says in all their meetings all the time. And, Chris Kasarik has those rookies running around between Michael, Alfred, and CJ. And I think just when you have really good coaches who know how to light a fire under you and know how to focus you and keep your rookies they get distracted kind of because it's a long season. There's a lot of meetings that they're not used to. If you keep their attention, they can become really good football players really fast.
Sunday was the most power you guys have run in
a minute.
years.
It's been a minute.
Maybe since 2019 Pittsburgh.
That's a great memory, yeah.
But from your perspective, is that a little more fun? I know you've talked about moving a guy from point A to point B.
Power is fantastic. It's God's play. It's buckle up, be more physical than the guy across from you. I love gap scheme. It's really fun to do, and Atlanta was kind of primed for it. They were really fast, athletic defensive line, but they don't have a Vita Vea out there, and so when you can move those guys a little bit easier, it makes gap scheme significantly easier. Got the linebackers running, know how Kyle does all the motions and stuff like that too. Gets backers' eyes off just a little bit, slows them down, allows us to punch a hip, roll out a backer, and Christian just one-on-one with safeties all day.
2019, you ended up going crazy with the zone runs down the stretch. Did the gap stuff early in the season, you feel, help set that up just because you attack defenses in multiple different ways?
In 2019?
Yeah.
Yes, but I also think that our running backs figured out how to run it better kind of towards the end of the year, our outside zone. And then when you had a guy like Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert, who both are like 4-2, 4-3 running backs, the way they can stretch and cut, there just weren't, I don't think teams were really ready for our Zorro stuff and the Spirit Bros stuff yet. So that was very helpful in that. And we still did a little bit of gap scheme there late in the year, but yeah, I just don't think teams were ready for all those double teams by me and Juice. Into a rhythm is what I would say. I feel like we got into a rhythm really early against Atlanta in the run game, and we're just big chunks. And, what I'm really looking forward to see is, Christian got a bunch of those, medium length carries, 8, 10, 12, 14 yards, and I think he's going to get another opportunity. He's going to break one off. Yeah, I know him a little bit. Yeah, I know. Actually, I talked to him last Saturday night. It was kind of nice.
That's George Kittle with, it's one of those things where he's talking about Mykel Williams, and George is just so good with the cameras. He's talking about Mykel just as Mykel is walking by, and he says that, I had a good learning lesson for Mykel Williams. And it's almost like he might have seen Mykel out of the corner of his eye, but Mykel's walking behind us, and Mykel just starts smiling because George Kittle is talking about him and the maturity of this 49ers rookie class. And note that Kittle at the start of that interview was also discussing Connor Colby and how impressed he's been with him. The other day, Kittle called out Colby's conditioning. So he's, I guess he's playing both sides. I said tough love the other day, fellow Iowa Hawkeye. And it's one of those things where the 49ers are so reliant on these veteran pillars. And that's why it was so tough when Nick Bosa and Fred Warner went down, and you just hope if you're the 49ers, they've already imparted a lot of the leadership necessary for the defense to keep on ticking. They've also have Robert Saleh, and he's not going to get hurt. He's on the defensive side of the ball, and he's just such a great teacher there. So maybe that can keep the defense reasonably afloat. But on the offensive side, you could just see how the veteran pillars of this team, maybe Kittle being the top one, but there's also Trent Williams, and there's also Christian McCaffrey, and now there's Brock Purdy in the quarterback room. You can see how important those guys are to the larger project that the 49ers are working on. And on the offensive side of the ball specifically, it has to be a heavily technically oriented, powerful, sound, bruising running game. Something that Kyle Juszczyk and Kristen Juszczyk discussed the other day. This is really, really good stuff. Courtesy of Mike, who was able to find this today. Just to, take a little bit of a look at this. Mike sent this to me, and we got to listen to Kyle Juszczyk. This comes from before the 49ers game against the Falcons, but I think it's really on theme with everything that we've discussed about this run game and its turnaround that we saw on Sunday.
It's going to be the best game that we've had all season running the football.
Hell yeah.
These guys are in over their skis. They think they're the best team in the league right now, and they're about to get humbled.
Oh, okay.
And they got to get humbled, as Kyle said last night, in a certain type of way. And that way is by running the football down their throat with physicality.
Fucking go!
And we got George this week, and the stadium's going to go crazy.
Yes, that's true.
And that's just going to energize everybody, and we're going to take care of business.
Is 44 going to get in the end zone?
I hope so.
It's from the wifed up, mic'd up YouTube channel. Kristen Juszczyk getting pumped up. It is Kristen and Claire's channel. Oh, they have their own YouTube channel now. So Mike found that. That's really good. Kyle mic'd up, Kristen mic'd up, and that was before the game. You could see the confidence in Kyle Juszczyk's eyes as he's talking about the run game later that night against the Atlanta Falcons. 49ers certainly got it done. I will say that I don't know if the 49ers plan was to run as much gap scheme power as they did, but they certainly have the capability of it, and they wanted to simplify what they were doing because they were only at 3.1 yards per carry entering the game, and a lot of teams were throwing exotic looks at them, and they were choking off the perimeter. They were getting George Kittle back, and they wanted to simplify, and it just ended up happening. I think Atlanta's very aggressive, as Kyle was saying. They play downhill. They're aggressive. They're athletic. A little bit of that lightness of the Atlanta front, as George told you, we were listening to that. Vita Vea, not in the middle of that Atlanta front, allowed the 49ers to go straight at them. I'm sure that this game plan was more interior heavy than exterior heavy, and it ended up being like extreme with how often Christian McCaffrey was running in between the hash marks. But the degree to which the 49ers did pound this ball inside was truly, truly staggering. I mean, I wrote about it on the San Francisco Standard. We had the NFL Next Gen Stats graphic. I think that's one that we should open up right now. I think it's very worth checking out again because this was something that we hadn't seen before under Kyle Shanahan. All right, I've got it here, and I'm going to get it open on the screen. Share it. There you go. This is what it looked like. I mean, normally, the lines out to the sideline, that's normally what you see. And you normally see a ton of that in a Shanahan approach. This is what they did against the Falcons. One thing that was awesome, if you put on the tape, is that George Kittle, I know there's a lot of people complaining, oh, he didn't help my fantasy team with any catches. So many of these runs up the middle, George Kittle is a lead blocker of sorts. Like normally Kyle Juszczyk will be the lead blocker. Kyle was running some of the more exterior ceiling stuff, so the defensive end couldn't come and crash in and take out the running back before the play even developed. They would move Kittle from a tight end position and just have him plow straight forward. And he's so athletic. There's times when like a safety or a cornerback can get tangled up in the middle there. And because he's lighter and quicker than a lead blocker or a lot offensive lineman, he can get around him and he could detonate a play just by being a pest in the way. George Kittle's a Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer, because he's as powerful as an offensive lineman. I mean, the guy's insanely strong, but he moves like a wide receiver. So it's as an absolute nuclear weapon to have George Kittle leading the way on some of these runs in the middle. Like Christian Ellis, the linebacker for Atlanta, just got completely removed. So let me riddle you this. This on Sunday, you're going to see Kittle against Azeez Al-Shire. I mean, that's a popcorn matchup, right? I mean, Atlanta had a decent defense. They weren't great against the run. Houston has an elite defense, but I would say they're not great against the run. They're better when they play this game on their terms, as every defense is. So if the 49ers can take this game to Houston and play on their terms with a balanced rushing attack, which obviously is set up by everything. They got to pass well to do that. The defense has to play decently so they don't fall behind. I mean, it takes the whole team to run the ball, as Kyle Shanahan said this past week. But if the 49ers can play this game on their terms against the Houston Texans, you're going to see some really, really fun matchups. One of them is, I would think, Kittle in the hole against Azeez Al-Shire, because they call it the little sweeper motion. A lot of teams are running it. The Bills ran it against the 49ers last year. In San Francisco, they couldn't stop anybody. They couldn't stop a nosebleed last year with their run defense. This year, they're stopping it, even though they're personnel short on defense. That's another big part of this. If you can run and the other team can't, and last game, that's exactly what happened. The 49ers ran. The Falcons couldn't, 3.1 per carry. The same team that obliterated the Buffalo Bills on the ground. But if you can control the ground dynamic, you're going to be favored to win essentially every game that you play. That's why the 49ers were perpetual favorites for like 2 straight years, almost 3 straight years. They're favorites a lot of the time in 2024, even after the injury problems started. So the Texans, I think, are 1.5 point favorites in this game, because I think that the thought is, that's obviously very close, but the thought is that the Houston Texans defense is going to be able to bottle up the 49ers offense enough, especially since Purdy probably won't be playing, since Pearsall probably won't be playing. So the 49ers aren't fully healthy yet on that offensive side. But the prevailing thought is that the Houston Texans will be able to bottle the 49ers up enough to set the table for their offense, which has not been great, definitely struggled last week, but is going to be able to take advantage of a decimated 49ers defense. The way to beat that, if you're the 49ers, is to methodically punch the ball downfield with a balanced offense that does take advantage of the fact that Houston has not been a great running defense. All right, I'm off my soapbox. That's the biggest story of the year for the 49ers, and it's something I'm going to cover in great, great detail. I know I've talked a lot about different aspects of it over the course of this week. I had the extra Kittle footage, and then I had that new use check footage. He was so confident before the game. I think this is a huge deal. I don't know why other people aren't covering it. I'm telling the story of the 49ers, and we've seen this before where San Francisco's discovered a run game as the season has progressed. I think about 2019. I think about 2021 with Deebo Samuel. I mean, they've had to be like chameleons here. They've had to create their run game in a different type of way each time. In 2019, it was the lightning fast outside zone with Mostert and with Tevin Coleman, as George Kittle was talking about. In 2021, it was the Deebo Samuel show for the 49ers because they were out of running backs. And Elijah Mitchell also contributed big time that year. So that was more of a bruising, physical inside zone kind of year, 2021. 2022 was the Christian McCaffrey trade on October 20th of that year. Turbocharged everything for the 49ers. 2023 was elite across the board. 19 Zorro, elite across the board. You remember the season opening play against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 2024 was a season to forget. I think that there's been an erosion, especially since McCaffrey was out in 2024. There had been an erosion, though, in the run game for the 49ers ever since 2023. And you get to 2025, and that erosion, I think, was apparent without George Kittle in the lineup over the course of the first few games of this season. He comes back into the lineup. The 49ers doubled down on a changeup, the gap scheme, the power stuff. And all of a sudden, outside zone looks a bit better. Christian McCaffrey is running like a man possessed. And guess what? When Kittle was on the field, the 49ers averaged 5.4 yards per carry. When Kittle was off the field, the 49ers averaged 2 yards per carry, like 2.0. They were a full 3.4 yards per carry better with Kittle on the field than off of it. Just goes to show you the personnel is king, but also personnel combined with the right play calling is king. And that's how the 49ers have turned around the rushing attack in those previous seasons. 19, 21, 22 all come to mind. I think 2025 is following a similar story for the 49ers. Anyway, the Warriors are playing their home opener right now against Denver. I think all of you guys should go watch that. I wanted to talk about the 49ers run game. We also have to hear from one of our sponsors before I finish up this show. And the sponsor this week is Bubs Naturals. Aging sucks, but it doesn't have to. That's where Bubs Naturals collagen peptides come in. Starting in your mid-20s, your body naturally produces less collagen every single year. And collagen is the protein that holds everything together. It's literally the glue of the body. With Bubs, you can help restore collagen levels closer to what your body naturally had in its youth. That means stronger joints, healthier hair and nails, smoother skin, and faster recovery. Live better longer. For a limited time only, our listeners are getting 20% off at Bubs Naturals by using the code Lombardi at checkout. Just head to bubsnaturals.com and use the code Lombardi, and you're all set. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that our show sent you. All right, I will leave you with that. Discounted, free stuff, whatever you want. Go check out Bubs Naturals. We got a nice half hour in. Warriors home opener is still happening, though, so I think it's time to go watch the greatness of Steph Curry. Talk to everybody soon.